Hello and welcome. This is the 8th episode of The State of Things with C.K. Slater. We've made a few changes here at the State of Things production studios. I am very glad to be joined today by an elected official, our representative for Florida's 16th State District, Jason Fischer. Jason, could you tell me a little bit about yourself, how you ended up being in politics, especially in an elected capacity, and just how you ended up sitting on my couch here today?
Well, thank you for inviting me to your house and here at your studio. We've been friends for quite a while, and I'm glad to join you on your show. Wish I could have come on sooner, maybe been your first guest, but still glad to be your first.
I feel like maybe our standards weren't up to where I wanted them to be. See, if I'm going to have an elected representative into the House, I want to make sure I'm bringing our A game. We got to be Sunday Tiger with the red shirt and the black pants. So I'm glad we could bring it today for you to join us.
Well, I am breaking barriers here, right? I'm the first elected official you've had.
Yes, you are. This is a first. You are breaking the elected official glass ceiling today on the State of Things.
All right. So a little bit about my background. I'm married, 3 kids. Our twins just turned 1. We have a 6-year-old, and I'm not a professional politician by any stretch. I've worked private sector and a little bit of public sector.
But you are a professional.
I am a professional.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have a Rubio moment here and drink a glass of water.
Hey, take all you need.
So I've worked small business. I've owned my own business. I've worked in bigger companies here at CSX. I'm currently an engineer at H&TB, which is a large national transportation engineering firm. And that's my day job. That's what I do 40 to 60 hours a week. And then part-time, I serve as an elected representative. I'm privileged to represent State House District 16, which is inside of Jacksonville. It's inside Duval County. It's Mandarin, Southside, Bay Meadows, San Marco area.
How many people live in your district?
Well, there's 110.
You can ballpark it.
There's roughly like 110,000. Every district's a little bit different on their sizes. But
is there much variance between the district populations, or?
Yeah, so by state law, it's about 5% varied either direction because of the not fair districts, but the requirements around redistricting to keep the districts roughly about the same size. It goes back to an old court case, 1 man, 1 vote was an original principle set out. So the districts are roughly the same size.
Okay. Now, was politics always a passion for you? Do you remember thinking about it in your younger days, or is it something maybe that you became awake to during your more developmental years in college? Could you just explain to me how politics began to play such a role in your life that it does now?
No, and I think one of the things about being a conservative is that you don't tend to think about government and politics most of your life. And for me, at least, I didn't until I became an engineer and was already working I was at FPL at the time, switching over to being an engineer for the Navy. And that's when I started getting a little bit interested in politics, because I saw the impacts that had not only in our day-to-day life, but with the wars that we were involved in and things like that. So you see what happens, what politics has an impact on it. And so I started looking, not just federally, but state and local.
Which is an important distinction because, and this is a lesson I'm sure a lot of you out there know, but the vast majority of the laws that impact you on a daily basis are either state or local laws. And it's so much easier to follow federal law because, all you have to do is watch TV to follow federal politics.
Right.
But if I had my druthers, people would care way more about what's going on in their zoning and school boards and city councils than they do about yelling at each other about the president.
Well, I think I think like you pointed out, the federal side is very easy for people to connect into. It's easy. It's kind of like a common language to talk about. But the first political activity I really got involved in was helping out a state representative. Actually, he was a former city councilman running for state representative. His name was Lake Ray. Mm-hmm. He was an engineer like I am, and so we connected on that professional level. And that's really what continued to draw me in. And you can see the impacts that the state politics has and the local politics has on your daily life. I served on a local school board before I ran for the state house. At the time, I only had one son, and our school system, which still isn't doing very well, was terrible. And so I decided, you know what, I'm not going to move. This is my home. This is my hometown. This is where I live. I'm going to plant my flag. I ran for the school board. And despite all the opposition from the status quo, despite all the opposition from the good old boy system, I ran and I won. And I was outspent 3-1. But because of the hard work that I put into everything that I do, I knocked on more doors. I didn't raise as much money, but we won. It was a 16-point margin of victory.
And what Jason just said, I think, is one of the most important things we are going to be discussing today, is that with enough hard work and enough door knocking, especially at the local level, it doesn't matter how much money your opponent can get people to donate to his campaign, as long as you have the fire in your belly to do the hard work of serving your constituents in the way they deserve to be served.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that makes local government and state government work better, is that at those levels, money doesn't matter as much. Regular people are actually able to get into office and serve. I think that's part of why the federal politics has gotten so detached. It's not just that there's money involved in politics, it's that it takes a massive amount of money to be able to get out there and talk to voters. Whereas in a district my size, about 110,000 constituents, in the school board's about 80,000, and out of that, a small portion actually show up to vote, and so you can get down and knock
on the doors,
on those doors, and really talk to those folks. Whereas in Congress, it's 700,000 people per member of Congress, and that's really tough to be able to knock. You just can't knock that many doors.
There's only so many hands you can shake.
Right, but it does lead to better governance. It's not only more reflective, I think, of the communities, but I also think it leads to more level-headed policymakers. At the state level, we pass a budget every year. It's a balanced budget, and this year it stopped. We curbed the growth of government. Like my first budget as a freshman legislator.
It wasn't it's just growing less situation. Right. We're actually effectively diminishing the size of government.
Right. And so we held the line. We did not pass the largest budget in state history. We decided we were going to cut taxes by, I think it was $1.3 billion is what the governor has signed into law so far. And so I'm proud to say that. And even on the local level, right? On the local level, we're required. We pass a budget every year. It's a balanced budget. And I voted against budgets locally that because I didn't want to raise taxes. I refused. I will not raise taxes. I ran on a campaign of low taxation, smaller government, and that's what I've held to.
Well, it is helpful to have a system of beliefs, ideological or otherwise, that you are consistent in sticking to. So I always appreciate people who can come to political conclusions from their ideological priors. Like, you understand what you believe about the world, and that leads you to come to a consistent set of political beliefs, as opposed to, I'm part of this group of people, so I'm automatically going to think blah.
Right. Yeah, look, fundamentally, I believe that you and your family and your neighbors all know how to spend the dollars that you've earned better than any government bureaucrat or even politician out there. I think you can decide where to spend those dollars best, and I think that's the fundamental difference between what conservatives believe and what liberals tend to believe. They tend to believe that the government can kind of do and can be involved in everything and will spend their money more efficiently, and I reject that notion.
Well, I think a lot of the discrepancy comes from the assumption that all it takes is the right kind of smart people getting together and into power, that then there is some unlockable magic equation that if we get all these Harvard grads in a room, put them on a blue ribbon commission, and say, write us perfect health care, that, throw $10 million at them and we're going to have perfect health care. When unfortunately, I have found that the people who actually live their lives frequently have a better idea of how to lead and live them, and also spend the money that they earned through dint of their labor, than does some kind of centralized committee of decision makers who may not be necessarily very invested in their well-being.
Yeah, I think that voluntary exchange that we see in a free market or a more free market system is what leads to those better outcomes. It's I'm giving you some service, you're exchanging some kind of value. We're both winning in that situation, and that leads to the better outcome. Whereas when you have these eggheads or these, as you said, these blue ribbon committee, folks to kind of come up with some wonky policy and use the threat of force
which is absolutely how you need to understand all government regulation law. is that this is occurring down the barrel of a gun, because try not paying or not doing or not agreeing with the law for long enough, the IRS is either going to come to your door or they're going to put you in jail down the barrel of a gun.
Right.
And that is
seize your property. They're going to take your house.
Yeah,
right?
and we can talk about kilo and civil forfeiture if you want to, but that might be a little bit beyond the scope of what we're getting into today. Sorry, the ADD. I got to chase the cats around my brain a little bit. But you mentioned a little bit earlier that you think local politics may be a more effective and more just place of policymaking because of the lack of financial influence there. Is that an idea that you would extrapolate to our federal system? Like, would you agree that the way we financially support our electoral and legislative politics might need to be changed in this century for effective governance?
Well, look, that's something that I think the federal elected officials are going to really have to focus on, because of the way the Constitution is set up. We as the state have been removed from a lot of the decision making and power at the federal level, right? So once the senators, U.S. senators, became popularly elected and not chosen by the state legislature, you move state government. Which is a
whole nother debate that I'd love to get into with you.
But my point here is that, yes, I'd love to see some kind of change and reform there. Unfortunately, the way the system's been restructured over time, they've pulled the state from making decisions about what happens at the federal level, constantly away from the process. So, yeah, look, when it takes $5 million for someone to run for Congress, that's absurd.
That is absurd. I think I have always been firmly of the opinion that I don't care what part of our society you come from. I don't care what your IQ says. I think everyone can be good people, and I think everyone has an experience in this life and a truth to tell me about how politics should be run in lieu of that truth. I don't think just because I went to college that I'm better than the people in flyover country.
Right.
I think one of the most important things is understanding the value of everyone's voice, and that is something I'm really trying to do here with this show.
Well, and it's very timely, because if you look at the last election in 2016, I think the people in what's considered flyover country, they felt left out. They felt left out, and they felt like they didn't have a voice. They felt like nobody was speaking to or for them. And
well, like I told you at Picasso's, for the last 8 years, it felt like politics was done to us, not for us.
Right. And so there was a wave of us who were elected who the voters sent us that clear message. Hey, look, I don't feel like I'm represented by the people that are currently in office. They may not have known exactly what needed to be done, but they said, by God, we think you're going to do some great stuff when you go up there, because we agree, we share the same values. And, for me, my message when I was running was that I was an engineer. I'm a problem solver. I'm not just, I'm not just some angry person.
You care about the ship floating, not who I'm going to blame for it sinking.
Right. And so I think I was able to kind of capture that anger and say, yes, I'm angry just like you are. I'm willing to go and do the hard work. And look, I have a record of solving problems professionally, and I want to help you do that. And as your elected representative, I want to go up there and solve problems. So I think your show is timely, and I think if hopefully we can get some other candidates on here on your show so you can talk to them about their experiences. But I really felt that when I was running in this last election cycle. I mean, voters are angry with their government. They're angry with the people who've been in office for decades, and they need a change. They need a change.
Well, and I absolutely think that desire for change is what so much of this last election was about, and we will get more into that, trust me, on the other side of the break. But just to put a bow on this, are you... With what you've been involved with in our legislative system so far here in the state of Florida, I'm assuming you have no regrets that you moved forward pursuing activism in politics, and the experience has been, maybe not what you expected it to be, but something that's been substantive and satisfied you and made you feel like you're really working for the people.
Look, I have 3 kids, and if I didn't feel like the time spent away from them was worth it, that I was actually making a difference in the political process, then I wouldn't keep doing it. I've only served, not even served a full year. I've served through 1 session and 1 special session as a legislator. I do feel like I was able to get some good stuff accomplished, and I do think the sacrifice that it takes, time away from my work, the professional, where I actually make money, because the state
pays you $28,000 a year.
Yeah, look, it's not insignificant, but it doesn't replace an engineering salary and kind of what I could do professionally in my life at this point. But it's really the sacrifice. When I say sacrifice, I mean time away from the family, time away from my kids. My twins just turned 1 year old. I can't ever get those moments back. So I feel like I did have some really good accomplishments. I was able to make some very good changes in the way that we run our state government.
Well, I'm glad it sounds like the juice was worth the squeeze for you there as far as pursuing a career in politics, but we are up against it for our first segment here. We will join you on the other side. And we are back here with Representative Jason Fischer. We closed the first segment speaking a little bit about what your experience has been in the state legislature and your maybe perspectives on it. For the benefit of our audience, can you just explain to me for a moment what is how many representatives do we have? What does state government look like in Florida? Is that model different than other states? Just take it away, Jason.
Sure. So glad to do that because, like we talked in the last segment, folks tend to focus mostly on the federal level, and it's kind of funny. I get called congressman all the time, and you just kind of roll with it. It's fun.
It's flattering.
A little bit, yeah. But so the way we're structured is similar to the federal level, but definitely different. There's 120 members in the Florida House of Representatives, and there's 40 senators in the Florida State Senate. The House members, again, they're all roughly the same size, about 110,000 constituents per person.
May I stop you for a moment?
Sure.
I'm assuming the legislative process is vastly similar to our actual Congress, where
we get things done?
Well,
they don't.
Okay, so maybe I should have said you were the polar opposite of Congress because you go to work
pass
and
a
do
budget,
things.
It's balanced, right? Yeah.
But my question is the process substantively the same? Where bills come out of the House, they then or they come out of committee, go into the House, then a bill comes up out of committee in the Senate, gets debated on, then you got to reconcile. Is it the same?
It's very similar in that type of process. There's a couple big differences, though. We have officially a 60-day legislative session every year. The only job that we're constitutionally required to do is pass a budget and pass a balanced budget, which I'm thankful that we did this year. We actually spend really more about 4 months out of the year going through that legislative process where we file bills. As a member, I get 6 bills that I can file. Senators are unlimited. And then we have a couple committee hearings before the official session actually starts, which is a 60-day session. And then because of that hard stop, again, we actually are productive. We get things done. There's a time crunch, and so it drives things forward very quickly. So in some ways we're similar, but in work productivity and actually getting stuff done, we get stuff done.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure in approval ratings, things are slightly different.
Maybe, but the big things that I focused on in the legislative session had to do with education. So I serve on a couple education committees. As a former school board member, it was a natural fit. I serve on natural resources and public lands. I serve on energy and utilities. I serve on it's called Joint Administrative Procedures Committee.
That sounds like the really fun one.
It's actually, if you know what you're doing, it's where you can go in and cut a lot of government over-regulation. So what happens is these agencies will come up with these rules and procedures, and we can kind of strike them down legislatively. And
so you have that kind of veto over the regulatory state here in Florida.
I mean, I wouldn't use the word veto. That's what's more of a power that's given to the governor. But
speaking as a layperson,
it's one of those obscure committees where you actually can get some real influence on what these agencies are doing to the detriment to small businesses. Sometimes you can go in and step in on their behalf and say, Office of Financial Regulation, this is over the line. The statute doesn't give you the power to do this. I know that can get a little wonky, but anyway, so I served on a couple committees, was able to get an understanding of what the state was doing in those areas. So, education's a big component that the state does.
And with you being an engineer, you told me that played a little bit into the focus with which what you've done in legislature so far.
Sure. I mean, I think when you look at the transportation bill that we passed, I was able to get some good things amended into there. and having that technical background sets you apart. In fact, I really feel like it sets me apart amongst my colleagues. Most of them are lawyers.
Unsurprisingly.
But there are several out there who are professionals. There's a couple CPAs that serve in the legislature. There's only 2 engineers, me and Jackie Toledo. She's from Tampa. I think I mentioned there's a couple doctors.
Do you guys have lunch together?
She is the chairwoman of the engineering caucus.
Awesome.
So there's only 2 of us. It's a very contentious election, I assure you.
It's a relatively small. It's a new caucus. We're up and coming.
Right. But the state government touches so many different levels. So many different things. So from the speed limit to the sales tax that you pay, even though we don't directly control property taxes, that's a state function, we can legislatively or through constitutional amendments lower property taxes. In fact, this year you'll have a chance, this coming election in 2018, you'll have a chance to vote on a property tax cut, so a further exemption to the homestead exemption. So there's a lot of different avenues of state policy. Not only did I focus on passing a law, my first law that I passed was called Andy's Law, but I also focus on repealing laws because I believe that sometimes governments get too big and too bloated and move into areas they shouldn't be.
You mean a Congress can not only just pass more stuff, they can actually take stuff away too?
It's a novel idea.
I know, it's a novel concept.
It sure is. And when you believe in reducing the size and scope of government, you not only focus on reducing the budget and cutting taxes.
Well, making sure that you have no more
books.
Forgive me for interrupting you, but making sure that you have no more legislation than you actually need to achieve the limited and stated goals of government.
Right. Absolutely. So the first bill that I mentioned that I've gotten passed as a state legislator, it's called Andy's Law. So it's named after Army Private Andy Long, who was gunned down, who was murdered by a jihadist in Arkansas outside of an Army-Navy recruiting station.
Could you explain that situation a little bit more to me?
Sure. So back in 2009, Private Andy Long and another Army individual were standing outside of an Army recruiting station, and a Muslim terrorist opened fire, killed him.
An Islamic extremist, maybe?
An Islamic extremist. And killed him, wounded the other person, and his father and a national organization have gone around and tried to get state legislatures to pass a law that closes a gap in law. So what Andy's Law does is it allows the victim of a terrorist attack or the family of victims of terrorist attacks to go after people who are financially helping the terrorists. So there's not just the guys that commit the acts of terror themselves, but there's a whole finance network of how these guys are able to learn how to fly airplanes, or they're able to get supplies.
Well, there's an entire support network that supports the horrible individuals who have caused all the chaos and, sorry, it just disgusts me, all the attacks that have happened in Europe, so I get a little angry whenever I talk about it. But for each one of these assholes that tries to kill us, there's an entire support network of other assholes trying to make sure that the asshole money from the asshole country gets to the asshole who's trying to blow us up when all we're trying to do is, I don't know, raise families. Well, most people think about terrorism only being a federal issue, and when I found out about this real loophole in federal law, we have a way to address it in state court. So it's a civil cause of action that was created, and it allows, again, victims of terrorism and the families of victims of terrorism to go after not just the terrorists themselves, because there's laws on the books that allow them to go after those guys. You got to go after the deep pockets.
We go after the deep pockets, the white glove, supposedly people who the only reason that these other guys can carry out those attacks are because of the financiers, and we need to be able to go after those guys, at the very least creating a chilling effect on those people, because we've got to do everything we can to protect our citizens. If the federal, the Congress isn't going to pass a law to protect those who are financing, to protect the families or give them a course of action to seek justice, then the states can do it, and several states have done it. There is a federal law that addresses it for international terrorism,
and that was something I wanted to bring up, because I actually find the international version of that slightly troubling, because it can create a circumstance where there's a terrorist attack and we get to sue Saudi Arabia now, or however that would go. Well, you know, if there's a drone strike and the AP covers it in a way that is not very flattering to the United States, does then that give a cause of action to everywhere we're involved militarily? You know, are we then judicially on the hook for all the anger at the fact that America basically has to militarily deal with instability throughout the world because no one else is willing to spend money on their militaries besides us?
Well, I think we need to encourage them to spend money on their own militaries. I think we need to be the biggest, strongest, baddest person on the block. But we don't need to go out and fight their wars for them. We need to make sure that we're taking care of our guys back home. We need to make sure that we're taking care of our veterans. We need to make sure that we're taking care of our people here. But when our allies are threatened, we should step in. I mean, we have no greater ally over in the Middle East than Israel. I know we're kind of getting off state topic here of some, but we should be willing to go and help our allies like that, but we shouldn't have to go out and protect people who have the means to protect themselves, right?
But choose not to.
Right, but choose not to.
Well, they choose not to so that they can create entitlements programs that are sustainable when you don't have a military budget, which is the argument I've always had about people who want to tout Finland and Norway and all these other countries is that the only reason they were able to develop the way that they have is because of the global order that has been maintained by U.S. military power after World War II. We can have a high-end fancy talk about, you know, who should care more about who, but the only reason all these other countries live in this nice soft world that allows them to contribute as much of their GDP to entitlements programs is because we are out there holding the guns on the dangerous walls, making sure that our world is safe for them to continue living in.
Well, and one day I hope maybe to have an impact on some of those policies, whether it's either as an elected official or, you know, at some point. So back in before I ran for the state house, I served as an engineer for the Navy, and so I'm not opposed to going back and doing some work in that realm at another point in my life or career, because there's other ways to do that. Well, but I hope to have that kind of impact. You know, at the state level, we don't have as much impact on that, but we do. You know, I mean, we do make sure that our opinions are known. Like when the ambassador to the United Nations basically was like, you know, just kind of abandoning Israel in the Human Rights Council, with the United Nations Council on Human Rights, and they were basically trying to chastise Israel. You know, we sent to our members of Congress our formal opinions on those issues, but they don't have to take action on it. They don't take action on much anyway. But
well, yeah, I know we got a little bit away from where we started there talking about Andy, but I feel that foreign policy is an important thing that not enough of our electorate maybe engages with, or maybe it is not a sexy enough topic for the people who talk about our politics to bring up as much as maybe I think they should. Because that, I think, is one of the few realms where government or federal government power is required, is, you know, maintaining the safety of its citizens, engaging in treaties, trade with other countries, and to a certain extent, yes, maintaining the global order, which is why...
But keep from a global government, because, God, I hope we never move down that road.
Yeah, well, luckily, I think humans are incompetent enough that we never could make a global world order, hopefully. But given that you are a Navy engineer, do you see moving forward through politics, and I'm assuming that you don't view your position now as maybe the last step, do you see looking forward in your political capacity to help serve the Navy while maybe not being in the Navy, but your understanding of naval issues and understanding of that side of things? I mean, I would feel if I had been a serviceman that I could help do more for other servicemen because of the opportunity to represent people and be on military committees and make sure they're getting the funding or the logistics or whatever it is that they need. And you have a unique perspective on that, maybe.
Sure. So just for clarity purposes, I did serve in a civilian capacity. I was not a contractor. I was a Navy civilian. So there's active duty, and then there's contractors, and then there's Navy civilians like what I was. So if you think about the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Navy, and the chain that's underneath them, those are all civilians. if you've ever seen the show NCIS, right? Very similar to that.
Frequently, they have had military careers, but
right. And so, what I have spent time doing in the state legislature, I've visited with our Guard members. So the National Guard, those all fall up underneath the state. And I've also helped sponsor legislation that allowed for alternative treatments for veterans who are either suffering from PTSD or otherwise. Whether it was through canine therapy. So believe it or not, having a service dog actually
hugely helpful for PTSD.
Absolutely. We actually have a local guy here who's focused in on that. And so I've done everything I can to support that at the state level, because there's a federal component and then there's also a state component to it. But the military and foreign policy really is more of a federal issue.
Yeah, so and I understand that's
so where outside. We can do things on the state level, absolutely, I've gotten involved.
Well, thank you very much for that explanation. Once again, we are up against it, but I think we are going to begin covering where is this ridiculous anger coming from in our politics. And we are back here for the third segment of the State of Things. Today, joining me still is Jason Fischer. Now, Jason, we've spoken a little bit about education and the role it plays in people's lives. We recently a bill went through the legislature known as 7069. Could you explain the importance of education to you as a lawmaker, but also the importance of education to our state government and, kind of the role you would like to see the state government playing there?
Sure. So House Bill 7069 has been controversial mostly on the left. I think most people on the right, so you talk about the political spectrum, tend to like it. There's a few detractors from it, but mostly what the bill's done is it's more of a policy bill. It's not like a school board focused bill. It has more of the day-to-day impact in the classroom. House Bill 7069 deals more with the policies. So at the state level, we provide a tremendous amount of funding to the schools, and we said, look, we're not going to continue to put money into things that just don't work. And if a school system, a school district is going to have a school that's going to fail for, say for instance, Northwest Jacksonville here has failed. It's the last 10 years. It's been either a D or an F school, so it is a failure factory. Less than 20% of their kids read on grade level. The state said no more. You've had your chance. You need to close schools like that down, or convert them into a charter school, or convert them into a district-managed charter, which means the district still retains control. The difference is
it's like an intermediate step between full charter and.
Well, they're not unionized.
Okay.
So they get a little bit more flexibility with employment and some other things. So they can still get another shot at it, but they have to fundamentally do it differently.
Yeah.
Or close it, or turn it into a charter school. And so that's one of the big changes. Another one.
But it's just making sure that a school can't be performing on a subpar average for so long.
Right. So yeah, it's basically there's 115 schools on a statewide list that have been failing for 3 or more years, consecutively. I think the list we looked at was five or more. The one here in Jacksonville happens to be a real big outlier. It's 10 years. But we said no more. Look, we're going to provide a tremendous amount of funding for public schools, but if you're going to have failure factories in your community, we're not going to support that at all. We don't want that. We think our kids should be learning. I mean, it is a tragedy that you'd have a school that for 10 years, D or an F school, where the kids, 18%, I think it's 18%, it's less than 20%, actually read on grade level. I mean, that's unconscionable. So that was a big part of the bill. Another big part was saying on Title I dollars, which is dollars set aside to help kids in poverty, that money will follow the students. So the districts were holding back a bunch of money. It's 54 cents on the dollar, basically. It was what the charter schools were getting that were Title I charter schools versus a district school. I could go through a bunch of other big policies that get kind of wonky. Parents focus on things like recess. So this bill actually requires there to be recess in elementary schools. It's amazing that you would think a state would have to mandate that, but there was a lot of school districts that weren't giving their kids recess. So we at the state level said, my God, let the kids out and play.
Well, thanks. I think that gives me a little bit better of an understanding of some of the long and the short of 7069. How do you see the charter school debate playing out? I mean, do you feel like you maybe have a more unique perspective on some of those debates now being in the state legislature than you otherwise would have? I mean, I know you were on the school board, so
yeah. So I served locally on the school board, and I was really frustrated there because I was in a minority most of the time. You know, the policy stuff that I wanted to do didn't get its fair shake, didn't get its hearing. And on the state level, it's 7069. I felt like I had a tremendous amount of input on. Not only did I serve on the committees, but there are a few people who can kind of talk to education intelligently, and so I was able to provide some real input on how to make some good policy tweaks there. I go back to say what I said when I was on the school board. Our job's more like a portfolio manager of educational options than it is anything else. So a lot of times school districts, they look at theirs as like a kingdom or their own little fiefdom, you know, where they control and do everything. And I think our job is to empower parents to send their kids to whatever school is going to give their kid the best education. And that means not just educational quality like reading and math, but also, you know, does it have the right value set, right? Do you want to send your kid, like, for instance, the tax credit scholarship program? The reason I support that is it says low income kids who are in failing schools can take their money and they can go to a private school if they want to. And so empowering people with choices. So I think that's kind of the big way that I look at the charter school, traditional school, and other debates. I don't care about who's the institution in control, unless it's the family. I want the parents to be in control. I want you to be able to say, well, no, I want to send my kid here, not there. And that's for a variety of different reasons. Maybe it's just they offer better programming. My son goes to a public school. He goes to Mandarin Oaks Elementary. And at Mandarin Oaks, they have a Chinese language program there. It's not offered at every school, but there's no reason why the school district should say, well, these kids get access to that program and these don't. We should be able to move our kids to a school where they're going to get the education that we want them to get.
Now, can you explain to me what your day-to-day like and what your experience as being a state lawmaker has been, just to maybe dig into that state legislative experience a little bit? Because I know for a lot of our audience, or for a lot of people generally, the understanding of state politics is something that they know it exists, but it's kind of like magic, you know, wizards used to do it and somebody might know about it, but I don't know how it works.
Yeah, well, I think we talked a little bit about it in one of the previous segments as far as the process works. We have term limits, so there's constantly new people involved in the legislature. So
another novel idea.
And so the time I was talking about earlier about how much time we spend away in doing our legislative jobs, part of that's training, getting up to speed, how to file a bill, how to get a bill heard in committee, what's the process for that. Is there like an orientation meeting? We do. We had, not only did we have new representative orientation meeting, but we had new caucus meetings. So new Republicans come in, they had their training. I'm sure that the Democrats did their own things. And so there's a huge learning curve when it comes to getting things done. So there's the formal process, filing the bills, getting things done, and then there's the more informal process where you're spending time talking to your colleagues, working the social aspect of it. We have a members lounge where, thankfully, they've created a space where no lobbyists are allowed. I don't necessarily.
Which must be lovely.
It is good to have a
well,
space
you can
where
only be
people
invited out to lunch so many times.
Well, you know. And thankfully, there's a gift ban. So in Florida, for the Florida legislature, the legislature doesn't accept gifts from lobbyists. The congressmen, and they have their own. All those guys have their own rules. But you know, if you get invited to go out to lunch with a lobbyist, there is no exchange there that happens. I know some people think that that's what happens. But I think being in an environment where you're around more of your colleagues adds to a community where you can share ideas, common ideas, talk about your values, talk about your family, get to know each other on a very personal level. And that's why I think state politics is less acrimonious, because you have this time to kind of spend together.
To build relationships.
To build real relationships.
And it's funny.
And that's more important. What I've seen is that's been more important to get things moved through the process. And that's kind of been frustrating to me as an engineer. I'm more data-driven, more facts-driven.
You just want to have a study and say, this is the number, let's do this.
This is the right policy, that's where we should go. And so there's some would say there's a balance. I think it's the balance of it leans more towards the social aspect of.
Well, to kind of highlight the importance of that, one of the most effective presidents, though, I might quibble with about what he achieved during his presidency. Lyndon Baines Johnson was famous for being able to build relationships with the Congress. And one of the reasons he was so effective was because he understood that he was part of a bigger group and not even the most important part of the group that creates the laws in our country. He understood that the relationships you build with Congress will allow you to then maybe help your agenda move forward, which is one of the things I think the past presidential administration actually overlooked, is that they were less concerned with building those relationships even within their own party in Congress, and that kind of held them back. But it's interesting to hear you talk about really how important those relationships are.
Well, there's the good and the bad to the relationship piece, right? So there's sometimes you see bad public policy move along because some people have really good relationships, and then there's the time when the good relationships are really helpful, where you have good public policy and that helps things to move along easier. I was really more frustrated on seeing some bad legislation move forward in some areas because I don't really think they were good public policy. Data didn't really drive it. Or really when you've got good public policy and it just doesn't move because those relationships out there either don't exist or they're not. They're really bad. And so that's the mercurialness of the legislative process. It's been a real learning experience as a freshman legislator and as somebody with a technical background like mine, who's just again more facts driven, more data driven,
curious about learning the process, that sort of stuff. Now, given that you've only been through one legislative session, do you feel like you have your sea legs now, or is it okay? I've been to the first, I got the syllabus. Now let's figure out how we're going to do the rest of this.
Well, I won't pretend that I understand how all the legislative process works. I do know a lot more now than I did coming in, and
I hope so.
Part of that's just trial and error, right? I'm an engineer. I like to tinker with things, and so I tried this and I tried that and I tried this, and I was able to get a lot of things that I wanted done through amendment processes. And so, like I said earlier, I think we get 6 bills as House members. So I had some formal bills filed. But for instance, the tax credit that you were able to enjoy earlier this month in June for disaster preparedness, I filed the bill that did that. My bill was moving, but I tacked it onto the tax package that ultimately passed. The governor signed into law. So just finding different ways to get your policy in place by putting it in other areas. A lot of the things that I wanted done happened to make it into 7069, and we heard almost all of the policy ideas in House Bill 7069. We heard them in the House under several different bills, and then it was put together in one bigger bill. So there's just different ways of doing things. I talked about Andy's Law, which passed. I talked about a repealer bill that I was able to get passed. And so there's just different ways to do it. Adapt and overcome.
Well, there are so many different ways to skin the cat of making legislative change happen.
Right.
And it sounds like you were learning to navigate the pathways of that process, strolling confidently down the halls of power in Tallahassee, Florida. But has your experience with the people you've been working with positive? And this is more to the staffers and just kind of maybe the culture that is in place on a human level in Tallahassee.
Yeah. So again, I spend more time with my Republican colleagues. I do spend time with the other members in general because of like I said, there's some areas where we all kind of get together. I think that particularly the new class that's come in, because we have term limits, so the freshmen, as I've said it, there's 27.
The clock's ticking on you already.
At 27 of us, there's an amazing amount of talent. I think there's only 6 lawyers, and the rest of us have jobs that are non-lawyer
real jobs.
Right. And so there's more real world experience in our group. I think also the frustration that we saw, mostly seen in the presidential election, I think is what helped and supported some of us who ran in 2016 to office, because we connected with those people who felt disconnected. They felt like, as I think you've said before, politics was not done for them, it was done to them, and we represented that different that difference that they were looking for, that somebody's going to go and fight for me. They want to cut my taxes, and they actually believe, because we were sincere, at least I was sincere in what I said, that when I told you I was going to go cut your taxes, that's what I set out to do. And when I told you that I was pro-life, I was going to stand up and make sure that those values were known and heard. I mean, for instance, there was a bill that was passed that I helped get through. Aaron Grawl was the primary sponsor on it, but it created a cause of action for a botched
botched abortion,
for a botched abortion by a doctor who was, so
I'll try not to say Kermit Goes Now under my breath.
Yeah. So there's things that we can do at the state level, even though there's some federal issues. But when I told you that I was going to stand up, when I knocked on my voters' doors and I told them I was going to stand up for their values, they believed that I was going to do what I said I was going to do, and I've gone up there and done it. But you can look at my whole class and say the same thing about a lot of them. They got elected because their constituents felt like the current guys in office just don't represent us. We need people who will.
Well,
I think that's what we're doing.
Thank you very much for all that, Jason. I can tell you that your candor just now speaks to the same authenticity your voters have so clearly seen in you. We are up against it for this third segment, but we are going to come back and talk a little bit about the current administration and about the ludicrous amount of anger in our politics. And we are back with Jason Fischer for our final segment here on The State of Things. I'd like to thank you for coming in today, Jason. I know you're a busy man with time that is important, so I appreciate you coming in. I would like to wrap up this show, or today's show, with a discussion about why our politics is so acrimonious. Why is the discussion in our country so loud, so lacking in substance, and so overbought on tribalism? I would like to hear maybe some of your perspectives on that, Jason.
Well, I'm glad to be able to join you on your show as we move here into this final segment. Just thinking back on some of the things that we've talked about, I think part of it is because people don't spend enough time together talking. Like I was talking about how there's a member lounge and there's an area where, as members of the House, we can get together and talk about family and friends and just have lunch, right? Just spend time talking to each other about our values and things. And I don't think that's happening enough, particularly on the political level in D.C.
Are you talking between like representatives or between humans?
Well, I was getting to there. Yeah. So
I guess representatives are humans technically.
I'm going to leave that one alone. But so the federal, politicians are, structurally they're just broken apart. And I think a similar things happen, in a slightly different way for the public in general. So technology, which I'm a huge fan of embracing the positive benefits of it, but technology has actually started to separate people into subgroups, right? So, you may not have Comcast, or you may not have cable. You may only have Netflix, and you may watch shows.
I cut cable. I don't have.
Did you see?
Yeah.
So you might watch shows that I've never seen, and I might watch shows that you've never seen. So so some of that bifurcation leads to a separation in culture and kind of common languages. Same thing with music, right? So I don't know if you have Pandora or Amazon.
Yeah.
And so you've been able to select and pick what type of music you want to listen to. So that personalization and customization, while it's enriched our lives personally and individually,
it's cloistered the amount of information that comes into us. When you when you're able to self-select the news that's coming to you about your world, inevitably that news is going to represent a more narrow viewpoint than it otherwise would.
Right. And so think about that, what that does to politics, right? So you talked about news, which there's an interplay there with politics. But you no longer now have to deal with people with differing political views than yours, because your Twitter is self-selective and your Facebook is self-selective, and the other ways in which you find friends tend to become very selective because you just don't have to do it. And subgroups tend to identify.
And Americans aren't joiners the way they used to. There was a book called Bowling Alone about how Americans used to join local civic organizations or their local church group or the local this, that, or the other thing. And now people are foregoing those kind of organic in real life groups for the groupings and tribalisms that they can engage in on the internet.
Right.
And that is that kind of atomization of everyone from each other. There are 6 girls sitting at a table at dinner and they're all on their phones. No one's actually talking to one another. I think there are actual real consequences to us as a species for losing the ability to communicate in a real one-on-one basis. I think one of the main reasons our online debate has become so acrimonious is because it's so much easier to call a Twitter handle and a post a Nazi than it is to sit here right in front of you, Jason, and call you a Nazi, which I would never do because you're not one.
Well, thankfully, thankfully,
I'm thankful as well.
as family members who came from Germany, so that's Fischer coming back from there. But I think that part of the problem with politics and the way things get discussed is it gets dehumanized in some way, right? So, like you were talking about the online component, and not, you just don't see somebody's face, you don't see their eyeballs when you're talking to them. But I think also that people started making value judgments based on what someone's political belief is. It's not just a disagreement any longer. It's not just that somebody disagrees to disagree with someone else, but you are evil now if you don't hold that same view, or you are somehow morally bankrupt because you have a slight policy difference on something. And I think getting back towards a conversation where we respect somebody's opinion, we respect their ability to have that opinion, and don't think of them as anything less than human for having that opinion. I think that's where we need to get to. I don't know exactly how it got there. What I can tell you is that when I talk to somebody, and I try to listen to what they're saying sincerely, and I think that would help when people are trying to have discussions. Is, well, what is this person? Not just the words they're using, but what do they mean? Like, what do they want? What are they trying to accomplish? Because
what is the intellectual and ideological rubric from which they are coming to these political conclusions? Like, what are their intentions? What's the moral framework from which they're building this policy prescription? And
you'll find, and there's some exceptions, but you'll find that for the most part, I think people have similar values, right? And so if you can get past that discussion about some of the policy differences themselves, and that moral judgment on somebody, just listen to what they're saying. What is their heart trying to communicate to you? And it's kind of weird for me to say that as an engineer, but I mean, that's what you have to do. You have to listen to, well,
let's talk about our emotions, Jason.
What is CK actually trying to communicate to me? Not exactly what are his words saying, but what is he trying to do in the world? Like what? And then they kind of be reflective on that and think, well, where do I connect on that? And so it's just rehumanizing in our own conversations. You can't make other people do that. You just have to kind of be the light yourself and be the change that you want to see in the world?
Yeah. Well, I agree with you so much there. And I do think that we have hope for improving the quality of our discourse. Although I think one of the main things, I think back in the 60s, the America that the Democrats wanted to achieve in their heads, and the America that Republicans wanted to achieve in their heads was vastly the same thing. I actually think with the big sort, the conservatives are all now Republicans, the liberals are all now Democrats, that whole thing. I've heard it said that the quote-unquote good, like the public good that people want to work to, and the actual ends of our political aims have become different. Like the America that, for instance, Barack Obama might have imagined in his head is different than the America I would like to work toward in my head. And that vision of what the ends of politics are being different, not only just the means of getting to that good place is different, but we're actually viewing the good as something completely different from the other side. I think that has maybe begun to happen. I also think with the birth of identity politics, 60s, 70s, because the instant that you attach a value to someone's identity as opposed to the candor of their thought or the intellectual rigor with which they've come to their positions, it's easy to then say, well, I support this group, and that's good enough. I don't have to argue for why I support this group or why supporting this group is good or why my positions are good. It's just, I'm the good person because I support them, and you're the bad person because you support them and they look different than this group. And now, because of that, I'm going to be able to demonize you as opposed to make valid arguments for my positions.
Yeah, I agree with so much of what you said there, and what I hope. I'm trying to think back. I think his name's Arthur Brooks. So he's the president of the American Enterprise Institute.
Yes,
he is.
Very
very good books. He had a recent discussion kind of on this topic. And so, look, maybe you'll figure it out with your show how to get more clicks from having positive, thoughtful conversations.
I really appreciate all you out there watching this positive conversation right now.
But I am hopeful that we make that transition, and maybe it takes our generation, maybe it takes a younger generation to bring that about. But it's going to be something that we have to work towards consciously. I think it's not going to just happen.
Well, to touch on a slightly darker but also maybe more pressing part of this topic is the frightening tendency of political acrimony to translate into actual political violence, especially since the beginning of Trump's administration. That is something that concerns me greatly, and I worry that, and I'm not saying Trump or the GOP has clean hands here, but I worry that the warlike and hyperbolic language that many in the media space have used to describe the president, and more importantly his voters or the GOP generally, these are the kind of media people who the world has trusted to tell them what is going on in it for the last 50 or 60 years. And a lot of people trust these people so implicitly that if it comes out of Paul Krugman's mouth, it must be the God's honest truth. The worry is that when these trusted media people are referring to the sitting president of the United States as an actual Nazi, his supporters are actual Nazis, well, a rational decision when faced with actual Nazis is to murder them. That's what we had to do with the actual Nazis. So,
or like Captain America, punch him in the face.
Yeah,
right?
punch him in the face. But I worry that the kind of loosening of the tongue in this way makes it easier for a crazy guy from Idaho or Iowa or wherever to have a gun, drive to Alexandria and say, well, I'm seeing these opinions about how the Republicans are this evil of a person in the New York Times. That lends credibility to my craziness and makes me more likely to engage in a violent act with regard to politics than I otherwise would have if we weren't talking about how the people who disagree with us are Nazis.
Yeah, so there's good, honest debate, right? And then there's things that are just way over the line. So when you see, I think Johnny Depp recently asked, when was the last time a president was assassinated?
Because John Wilkes Booth is just the biggest knee slapper of a joke ever.
Right. Or, I'm not going to even say her name. Probably shouldn't even said his name, but the stupid comedian that held up a picture of Trump's severed head. I mean, that kind of stuff is not only bizarre and uncalled for, but I think it doesn't just diminish the discussion, but it can encourage people towards violence who are mentally unstable. And those celebrities and those media figures who encourage people to move in that direction should be aware that that's the impact that they could have on people who are legitimately like have a legitimate mental problem. And it's not that they should have their First Amendment rights or their ability to free speech curtailed at all in any way. But they should be aware of the violence that they're encouraging by doing that. And it's not the open policy discussions about what you should do about. I think we should get rid of Obamacare. There's some on the left that think that they should keep it, right? Have those debates and talk about those things.
But because we're having
that violent type, example and rhetoric, I mean, that's totally different ballgame.
Well, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and many folks are making the argument right now that because of the fact that we're trying to push the AHC, if it passes, we will be on the hook, first-degree murder for 27 million people. Like, that is the language that's coming out. And this a week after the shooting in Alexandria. Now, I feel like I'm getting on my high horse here, but I just think that we are quickly getting to a place where the slow grinding gears and machinery that are dissolving our ability to be civil with one another are quickly getting to a place where they cannot be stopped. And I worry that Republicans and Democrats in 30 or 40 years are going to look like the Sunni and the Shia just in a first world country where we have completely sorted ourselves. We can't have any kind of conversation, and it's just a mess. And I'm not saying I have a crystal ball or anything, and I think the First Amendment is important. I'm not saying that any law should ever be written to curtail the First Amendment rights of anyone. What I am saying is I think we are better culturally when it is culturally shameful and looked down upon for people to make these kind of stupid statements. We used to live in a world where they would think better of doing any of these things because they know this is shameful. You shouldn't talk about people this way. I'm not being part of the solution. I'm being part of the problem. I think that kind of sense of a single culture and cultural shame is something that we have lost. Like, I'm not saying we should legislate any of this, but I think we should be better as a people and understand that in a society where we want to be able to talk with one another, the people that make these kind of stupid pronouncements should be shunned.
Yeah, that's why, I mentioned about the comedian earlier and the fact that I shouldn't mention the other actor's name. Look, let's just forget they exist. If that's where they're going to go, if that's what they're going to use.
Well, given her comedy and his movies lately, I have already been missing them. So
right. So I do think you brought up the issue in Virginia. I do think that we as elected officials should take extra precautions because of the rhetoric that the other side has started to use and engage in, and it's concerning. It's concerning. It should be concerning,
and it should be concerning when we do it as well.
Yeah, look, I don't know anyone that tolerates folks who.
We have a media that is invested in picking out every tiny misstep by any Republican backbencher, so we don't have the problem of doing things that look bad and
they're
not
rightfully
getting
shunned
on.
And pushed out of either their office or whatever they're in, and the other side doesn't tend to have that same self-policing.
The great thing is that I think we are moving quickly in a new media space. What up, YouTube? I think we're quickly moving to a place where the power that these traditional media sources are losing, and they're losing it faster than they can even understand. And that's why they're so histrionic these days. But we have gone a little bit over schedule today. I'd like to be respectful of Jason's time. Thank you for all of you who have come to sit down with the two of us today. This has been CK Slater and Jason Fischer for The State of Things. Like and subscribe below if you've enjoyed the video, and have a great afternoon.